Hello, BookTube. Well, as promised, it is very hot today. 90 degrees. Have mercy, John, please. It's hot as hell in Philadelphia. I've come to the conclusion that one useless man is called a disgrace, that two become a law firm, and that three or more become a Congress. And by God, I have had this Congress for 10 years. King George and his Parliament have gulled, cullied, and diddled these colonies with their illegal acts. Townsend Acts, Sugar Acts, Stamp Acts, Tea Acts. And when we've dared stand up like men, they've blocked our trade, blockaded our towns, seized our arms, and burned our people. And still this Congress refuses to grant any of my proposals on independence, even so much as the courtesy of open debate. It's very hot. It's not humid. The humidity has gone away, but nevertheless, it's boiling. And it's the kind of heat that barely holds off in the early morning. It's the early morning, the crack of dawn. In fact, not the crack of dawn, but I live underneath the lee of a ridge, of a wooded ridge. So the sun doesn't hit me as soon as it comes up. It's filtering through those trees and heaving itself up over that ridge before it actually pours down here. And that little magic moment is when I tend to go out first thing in the morning with the bean. And that early morning walk, there was residual heat in the air, but there was also a breeze, bit of coolness. And you could tell even then while we were walking around that it was going to be awful. And unbelievably, I had to go out. It's unbelievable to me even now to look back on it and think that I went out in this furnace weather. I used to do it all the time. You'd think it wouldn't be any unbelievable thing for me. I used to work. I used to work in retail, which meant you went out in all weathers. You just did. And you'd get to your destination, you'd get to your job covered in sweat and grime and be expected to be on your feet and working for the next 9 hours. While my dogs laid around at home, hot, bored. Nevertheless, I'm a pampered little thing now, and so I was amazed that I had to go out. I had 2 meetings that I had to go to in person. I made a point of asking, are we 100% sure that we can't do this virtually, that we can't do this over, remotely? But no. And since I had to go out, and since the things I had to go out for were a bit on the tedious side, I decided to reward myself with a trip to the Brattle. Even though I've gone already this week, and even though I knew it was going to be very hot. And it turns out that the timing of everything that I had to do got me at the Brattle right first thing, so it wasn't hot yet. And I got a stack of books. I know that it will seem surprising, maybe, to some of you who are new to this channel. I will have to describe the Brattle is a used bookstore in downtown Boston, but they have an enormous turnover. They turn over their stock at an unbelievable rate. They're out buying all the time. And they're constantly filtering all of those buys up from the basement into the store and also into the sale lot next door. There's a sale lot next door that's huge. Thousands more books for $1, $3, or $5. So you actually can go twice in 1 week and see a whole bunch of things that you didn't see the first time. Or, also true in my case, see some things that in the intervening days your reading has developed a hunger for. Right? So that I read very fast. I do a huge amount of reading every week. So if I go to the Brattle on a Monday, there are going to be books that I look at out in the sale lot that don't attract my eye at all. Because they don't resonate with anything that I have just read. I haven't read it yet. But then I do, and suddenly there's a little hole there. There's a little gap that needs to be filled. I used to go to the Brattle every single day. I used to work at a retail bookstore around the corner from the Brattle. So I used to go every day on my lunch hour. So I know perfectly well that you can go every day if you want to. 2 times in 1 week is not excessive at all. I've lived in places, I've been very familiar with used bookstores where 2 visits in 1 week would have been utterly fruitless. The second visit would have seen everything exactly as it was the first time, even the placement of books. If you'd taken a book off the shelf and put it sideways and forgot to put it back where it was, a week later it would still be there sideways. I've known used bookstores like that, but the Brattle is not like that at all. The Brattle has massive tectonic shift. So I went. and I got a stack of books, and I want to show them to you. But I want to start off with two books that I didn't get at the Brattle. I got them in the mail, but I didn't open them on camera. And they're substantial. They're August releases that are substantial. We're coming to the end of July now, and I am starting to think that July was not a particularly substantial month for new releases. Some, here and there. But I'm looking back on the month, as I tend to do. As the month winds down, I tend to assess it in all kinds of ways, except I tend not to make videos about it. I really should. And I'm not seeing much that stands out, really. Much that's serious or important, and some of that might have to do with a relic attitude on the part of mainstream publishers to not put out substantial books at the heart of summer, that people aren't going to be interested in that. I've never found that to be true. Readers read in all kinds of weather. You can never predict. But there are a handful of publications coming out in August that are substantial. And I got two of them at the same time the other day. I just didn't film the opening of. The first one is this. It's edited by Stephen Gould Axelrod and Gregorz Kosh, and it's the memoirs of Robert Lowell. There's a little psychopath right there. That's a kid you wouldn't allow near your puppy, would you? And this is Robert Lowell's a chunk of his autobiography that was only comparatively recently found, and a ton of his nonfiction is gathered in here to make the weight, to fill it out. So, I will read the autobiography, but I'd be much more interested in his reflections on poets, on Hannah Arendt. Lots of occasional pieces are in here, and that's the main draw for me. But this has a release date of, I think, early August. Yeah, August 2nd, which is just a week away. So that was one of the substantial things that I got. This is going to get reviewed. It's a substantial thing. This kind of thing has not been done before for Robert Lowell. And then the other thing I got is a finished copy of a book about someone that Lowell writes about. He writes a couple of pieces on T.S. Eliot, and this is Robert Crawford's the finished copy of his Eliot After the Wasteland, which is the second volume. He wrote a volume a couple of years ago, last year, called Young Eliot. I praised it on this channel. I loved it. I think it made my year-end biography list, and I got both of these books, and I've spent a great deal of time with them already, and I plan to spend a lot more. But I wanted to make sure that you saw them. This comes out at the end of August. Yeah, this comes out a month from now. So these are both August releases, and substantial things, as opposed to make-weight pocket histories of this or that have their heart in the right place, but don't really strive for much, and they don't really achieve much. Little things like that. I imagine books like that have an appeal. I'll review some of them, certainly. My reviewing pace for non-paid work, for Open Letters Review, took a serious hit thanks to construction, but it's trickling back. But those are two books that are coming out in August. There are a handful of books coming out in August that are substantial, and these are two of them. So I wanted to make sure you saw them. But then we'll get to the Brattle. And the first of these is something that had been on my mind a couple of times a month, it seems, on this channel. Circumstances can be guaranteed to bring up the name of John C. Fremont, the great explorer, the pathfinder, John C. Fremont. Seems like he comes up regularly on this channel. He's a historical figure. He and his wife had a biography just recently that we saw on this channel. Every time he comes up, I always show you his picture and try to convince you that when he was 20, he was a super hottie. His cares and worries grew on him, and also a bit of ill health, and most of the later portraits show that. But every time he's come up, I have had the same reaction. I have thought, Alan Nevins wrote a biography of Fremont almost 100 years ago that was fantastic. Surely the Brattle will provide. Surely the Brattle will turn up a copy of that book. And I found a copy. A paperback that's absolutely lovely. Look at that. It doesn't have Fremont on it. That is so wonderful. It's such a wonderful thing to do. This came out in the 1930s. Yeah, see? You're not going to look at that and think super hottie, but believe you me, if you could find a portrait of him when he was 20, you would see what I mean. Yeah, this came out in 1939. So, that's what? That's a long time ago. That's 90 years ago. So when we reach 2039, it'll be a century. It won't be reprinted because this will be an authoritarian landscape and books will be outlawed, except for canonical books, The Art of the Deal, that sort of thing. But it's not far off. And yet, as I've mentioned many times on this channel, the idea that biographies go out of date always sits poorly with me. Nevins writes beautifully. He's a fantastic writer. And this is the very thing. Don't think I've ever seen this trade paperback before. How lovely. So much better than an out-of-focus portrait of Fremont and his wife on the cover. So much better than that. Then we have something for the gays. You got to have something for the gays. Actually, quite a bit for the gays in this Brattle haul. This is something I haven't seen in forever. I always smile just a bit. This is by Michael Jensen. I believe this was his debut. It's a historical novel that's also a gay novel. It's called Frontiers. And it's set right after the American Revolution, 17-something or other. Does it actually tell me? 1797. And involves two men, one older and one younger, encountering each other and realizing that they share the same horrid vice. And it's a little bit dodgy as a debut. It's scattered. The pacing is horrible, as pacing is horrible in most debuts. And the thing that makes me always smile about it, I thought it was nice. It had a heart to it. I will certainly reread it. Did we have a date? 1999. So that's a long time, too. The thing that always makes me smile about it is that there are two trade paperbacks in the U.S. They look radically different. This one has a kind of Tony literary style to it, and the other one is a straight-up painting of two men overlooking a picturesque valley. One is on horseback and one is on foot. The one on horseback is wearing Daniel Boone-style buckskins, and the one on foot has no shirt on. It has Soloflex-style 1980s muscles. I didn't see that paperback in the sale lot today, but I found this one and immediately thought, well, I'll definitely read it again. And then when you're talking about gay fiction, there's a poobah. There are a number of poobahs, not as many as there should be, but there's a poobah. Alan Hollinghurst is a poobah. The Line of Beauty was, a big breakout thing from him, but he also had a much talked about, much ballyhooed debut novel, and I found it in hardcover. I've never seen this in hardcover before. The Swimming Pool Library. There's young Wilson on the cover there, and this is a story of a debauched young aristocrat who never met a man he didn't want to Roger, and he eventually, through a fairly funny scene, I remember reading this when it first came out and thinking, boy, that could have been funnier. I mean, you've got a virtuoso command of the English language, but if you had Kingsley Amos's comic timing, their meeting scene would have been genuinely funny. He meets a doddering older nobleman who's on the border of senility and who is shocked by this young man's libertine habits, and decides to put him to work writing the story of the older man's life and also his family. And the story progresses from there, and it lurches, and it's got a whole host of debut novel problems. Pacing, as I mentioned, is one of those problems. Also, portentousness. All debut authors think they're reinventing the wheel, and it takes a novel or two to get that out of them and just get them to stop fussing around and tell your story. And if you don't have any more stories to tell, well, then admit that and go into teaching rather than write all your career long. And just admit you had the one book in you and stop doing it. But even despite all that, when I read this the first time, I thought, there are parts of this that are really good. And the last third of it is genuinely moving. So I saw it in hardcover. I don't have a copy of it at all. I've never really liked. There was a trade paperback that was really popular in the United States, and I didn't like the design of the thing at all. It didn't look anything like this. So I'll give it a try, absolutely. Then we have a book from, this is comparatively recently, because I got this from the publisher, 2012. So that's not long ago at all. And when I got it from the publisher, I had my doubts. It's an author I don't tend to like all that much. It's Salman Rushdie. But this is different. This is not a novel. This is his memoir, Joseph Anton, which was the name that he used when he was in hiding from the Ayatollah Khomeini when a fatwa was placed on his head for the writing of the satanic verses. Suddenly he and his family had to go into hiding, and he used often the name Joseph Anton. And this is a memoir of that experience. And it has all of Salman Rushdie's weaknesses, except one. His main weakness is that the true love of his life is Salman Rushdie. And it comes through in every line of every word of every book that he wrote. And also, he tends to overwrite. And no one's ever managed to teach him not to do that. And I'm sure he's not teachable anymore. But it also has all of his strengths. Tremendously evocative writing. A wonderful talent for scenes. For a discrete scene that has an interior power of its own. I liked this book a lot. I think it made the year-end list for 2012 for my intergalactically famous literary blog, Steve Reads, in which at the end of every year I tabulate the best and worst books of that year. I wasn't expecting to like it at all, and instead I really liked it. It's my favorite book by this author, even beating out the novel The Enchantress of Florence. And it has a modern resonance as well, because Martin Amis just recently wrote a book very much like this. I mean, there's as much fiction in this memoir as there is memoir in the novel that Martin Amis wrote just recently about his friendship with Christopher Hitchens. They seem, in my memory, very similar. I'm going to read this again. I wouldn't be surprised if when I finish with it, I feel prompted to read, what was it again? I forget even the name of that Martin Amis book. It had an unbelievably boring name, as his books tend to do. It should have been called Hitch, but it wasn't. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It doesn't matter anyway. It's a side tangent, but I feel certain that I'm going to want to read it again once I'm finished with this. Then this next book, we'll go back to the gays. This is something that I hauled from the Brattle Bookshop just a little while ago, just last year, I think. But I got rid of it. One of you wanted it, so I boxed it up, sent it away, and found it again in better shape with a clear plastic library dust jacket cover over it. This is Edward Mandelson's book on early Auden. There is Auden when he was dallying with Wilson, and Mendelsohn not only wrote another book called Late Auden, but also was the editor of those two enormous Auden volumes of complete poetry that I unboxed on this channel and squealed in delight over. Mendelsohn has a gift for writing about Auden. He is amazingly informed, of course, as a literary executor would expect to be, but also has a sensitive ear and is also very good at setting scenes. That having been said, I'm not all that fond of the later Auden book, not for any fault of Mendelssohn's, but because the later Auden was Auden. He was this big, gigantic, multi-operational, well-staffed, well-curated thing called W.H. Auden. And that got it has a lot bigger literary names in it, but it got a lot less interesting to read about. Because any kind of genuineness, any kind of human being, which is what I go to biographies for, is largely gone. And here, oh my, the young Auden is intensely human, and so is everyone around him. I grabbed a second copy. These things were all out in the sale lot, so they were all free, or not free, but dirt cheap. Then the next three that we're going to do, we'll finish out with three books that epitomize a saying that I always say about this particular used bookstore. I always say the Brattle will provide. Because of their enormous turnover, because there's so many books out in that sale lot, that you can't take them all in at one time. You have to probe it slowly over many visits. Because of that, over the years, I have noticed that if a gap or an interest opens up in my reading life, the Brattle will tend to provide the exact right thing to fill that gap. Even if I'm not 100% sure that I know what that gap is. But if I do know, oh yes, absolutely. If I were to, just hypothetically, if I were to develop an interest in what's a topic that I'm not interested in, fishing, or raising cats, or rug work, antique rugs, studying rugs, valuing them, pricing them, caring for them, that sort of thing. If I were in the course organically, not artificially as in this video, but if I were organically to develop an interest in a subject like that, I can almost guarantee that the Brattle would provide. That eventually I would start to see books on those subjects show up in the Brattle sale lot. Now, you could say that that's just psychology and that those books were there anyway and I just didn't notice them. That could be true. Absolutely. But the maxim isn't affected either way. And the next 3 books demonstrate that. The last one, spectacularly. Just spectacularly. Kind of thing that just... I love my bookstore. Let's put it that way. The first one is by Jean Kalogridis, and it is The Borgia Bride. I believe this is a UK hardcover of a novel, a big historical novel of hers about the Borgia family, specifically Lucrezia Borgia, but also Rodrigo and Cesare Borgia. And I have, when was it? 2 weeks ago, something like that, a month ago, I suggested out loud, idly, that maybe I needed to read up on the Borgias in order to write a book about Cesare Borgia, in order to write a kind of Wolf Hall style, 3-dimensional but not necessarily sympathetic, biographical historical novel about Cesare Borgia. And once I sort of openly toyed with that idea, Borgia books started cropping up. I firmly believe they were not there. And I think I would have noticed them anyway. Unlike with the care and feeding of Oriental rugs, I think I would have noticed them anyway. This big feast of a thing, don't think I ever read this. If I remember correctly, the American trade paperback, which is the only thing I would have seen, the only version of this I would have seen, was pretty ugly. And also pretty poorly made, if I remember correctly. Whereas this... it seems much sturdier. So that was Brattle Will Provide number 1. Brattle Will Provide number 2 is a little more immediate. I mentioned the other day I got a copy of And the King of Babylon Shall Not Come Against You by George Garrett. And I went on a little bit about him, about how beloved he was by his students, about how genuinely talented he was. And I mentioned that his great trilogy of historical novels, The Succession, Death of the Fox, and Entered from the Sun, that the Succession, his big book on the passing of power from Elizabeth I to James, had been at the Brattle in a pristine hardcover with a plastic dust jacket just a little while ago, just the beginning of summer, and that I had not gotten it and could kick myself because I was never going to see it again. And I went today, and there was Death of the Fox in a perfect condition hardcover with a plastic dust jacket on it. So was this the same person? It had to be. It absolutely had to be. So I missed my chance to get this person's copy of The Succession. It's gone from the sale line. And it's not inside the store either. But I didn't miss my copy to get this. That I'm not particularly in the mood to read. This is a novel about Walter Raleigh, and I'm not particularly in the mood to read that at the moment. But you cannot say no when the Brattle gods do this sort of thing. You cannot do that. If the Brattle does provide, you can't say, I've moved on. No. You'll never find anything but old, used Sudoku if you do that. So I grabbed this. And naturally, I am wondering, I've missed my chance at that copy of The Succession. I grabbed this, but is there a copy of Enter from the Sun coming? Trundling up from the basement? Is the Brattle going to provide me with a hardcover copy of that book? Ooh. We shall see. But I got this, and who knows? I might be tempted to reread this sooner than I expected. It could be. Maybe 10 pages would be enough to entice me. But then the third, the final of these books that illustrate the Brattle Will Provide, is amazing. Simply amazing. When I saw it on a cart this morning, in the morning heat, out in the sale lot at the Brattle, I cackled with laughter out loud. There was no one around for me to share it with, but I cackled with laughter. Because just the other day, just yesterday, on our daily poem, I read you a poem by Joseph Warren Beach. I read you 2, in fact. And I talked a little about him, how he was at a standard academic career, he was honored, he was well-loved, and he was prolific throughout his writing career. He wrote volumes of poetry, at least 1 volume of fiction, and also critical studies. And I didn't mention the critical studies yesterday, but one of you emailed me and said, I bet that's how you came to this author, through his critical studies. I bet that's how you know him. And I mentioned at the time that he's long gone out of print, that he's long forgotten. And at the Brattle this morning, I found his book on Auden, The Making of the Auden Canon. This is about his study of how Auden's poems became finalized, how early Auden became late Auden, became the established Auden. And it's in perfect condition with a plastic library dust jacket for $1. It's just unbelievable. Except I do believe it, because this has happened to me countless times where the Brattle provides. I remember the first few times it did, decades and decades and decades ago, when it seemed eerie. Now I almost expect it. So there you go. That is a middle of the heat wave trip to the Brattle Bookstop. The weekend is going to be brutally hot, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It looks like there'll be a slight dip in temperature on Monday, and maybe the temperatures won't get so hot next week. They'll still be hot. It'll still be 90 degrees every day. But maybe it won't be 100 degrees. Maybe it looks like a very weak frontal system might come through Boston on Sunday. I predict that it won't be strong enough to drop a single drop of rain anywhere on the state of Massachusetts, which is in a drought and badly needs water. But it might be strong enough to break the hold of this truly oppressive heat and just return us to normal summer heat. We shall see. But I know I said at the beginning of the week there was no way I was going to stir out of doors with the heat coming the way it was. That's how I justified going to the Brattle the last time. But I had to go out anyway. My presence was requested. So that's the excuse I'm making this time. So that's what I got at the Brattle this time around. I got The Making of the Auden Canon. It goes on the quick list for rereads, just because I'm astonished that I'm holding it in my hand. Then The Death of the Fox by George Garrett, one of his great historical novels. The Borgia Bride by Jean Calogridis. Don't think I've ever read this. It won't be up to snuff of George Garrett, but it might be good. You never know. Then Early Auden by Edward Mendelsohn, replacing a copy that I sent to one of you. I remember when I sent it, the person that it was said, oh no, I couldn't ask you to do that. I absolutely couldn't. I kept saying, the Brattle will provide. I am situated to see a second copy of this book long before you ever do. So that makes sense. That's what it means to be friends. But anyway, then we have Joseph Anton, memoir by Salman Rushdie. We have The Swimming Pool Library, Alan Hollinghurst's debut. We have Frontiers by Michael Jensen with the presentable cover as opposed to the himbo cover. And finally, Alan Nevin's book, his biography of Fremont, The Pathfinder, in this lovely little trade paperback that I did not see coming, did not expect it. We have those two things plus Robert Lowell's memoirs and occasional nonfiction, and Eliot After the Wasteland, part 2 of Robert Crawford's 2-part biography of T.S. Eliot. So those are the books for today. Very, very hot day. The little AC unit is really earning its keep today. But who knows? Well, actually, I shouldn't say who knows, because I do know. Tomorrow is going to be much worse. Tomorrow is going to be 15 degrees Fahrenheit worse. And I am not, repeat, not going anywhere this weekend. I am not stirring out of doors. I don't care if the powers that be say they need me like a blood donation. I am not leaving. I am not doing any kinds of errands until at least Monday. And even Monday is going to be 90 degrees. We shall see. This time, I mean it. Not only because I would worry, when the temperature gets into triple digits, I would worry about leaving Frida here. It's fairly cool here. I leave a fan on the floor, and she knows to take care of herself, but even so, there were too many years where I had to leave and didn't want to justify me leaving when I don't have to. But it's not only that. It's also something else that I try not to think about, but nevertheless, this kind of heat is dangerous. When I was walking around outside today, especially once I had a shoulder bag entirely full of hardcover books, that's a risk. A totally unnecessary one. To say nothing of the fact that I was riding on the same subway line here in Boston that made national news yesterday. You may have seen the pictures of an Orange Line trolley bursting into flame. Passengers leaping out the windows. One passenger leapt into the Mystic River. It's like something out of a bad Hollywood movie. That was the very line I was taking. It's the oldest and most decrepit line because no politicians live on it. No politicians live on the Orange Line. They live on the Red Line, and they live on the Green Line. And so The red and green line, mysteriously, are always well upkept. And huge tourist attractions live on the blue line. And so it also is mysteriously upkept. The orange line, the ratty old boxy orange line, it failed spectacularly during Boston's snowpocalypse almost 10 years ago. And yesterday, I think, would count as a spectacular failure. If a picture of your orange line in, Michael Bay style, big balls of bright orange fire, if pictures of that, video of that, making national news isn't dropping the ball, I don't know what would be. So there were many dangers today. I'm going to try not to have any of those this weekend. A very laid-back, siesta-style weekend where both Frida and I take it easy. I certainly have plenty to read. So I'm going to wrap this up. That was a heat wave trip to the Brattle, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.